Hi, it's Dwyer, January 3rd, 2024. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, we all understand that boxing is weight specific, right? Roberto Duran was almost unbeatable at lightweight. Not so much at welterweight or middleweight. Sugar Ray Robinson was almost unbeatable at welterweight. Not so much at middleweight. You have a situation in boxing right now that gamblers need to know about. We have an unbeaten young champ, seemingly in his prime, who just had one of the biggest wins of his career. Folks, he looked magnificent in the win, right? It's a new weight class for him, and he looked magnificent. He was coming up from 135 pounds. But there is an open secret lurking in the background that threatens it all. On the night of the fight, the California Boxing Commission weighed the fighters. Surprisingly, although the fight was for the title at 140 pounds, a weight both fighters had made the day before at the weigh-in, Devin Haney on the night of the fight had gained 25 pounds. You heard right, 25 pounds, and weighed 165 pounds. That's 5 more than the weight limit at middleweight. He weighed 165 pounds on the night of the fight against 140-pound champion Regis Prograis, who himself gained around 10 pounds after the weigh-in. Now, since that fight, Haney has traveled to Saudi Arabia and has been photographed with people like Anthony Joshua, among others. In the photos, it looks like Haney has gained even more weight. Now, as fans of Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., Ricky Hatton, Roberto Duran, and Adrian Broner all recognize gaining and losing a lot of weight between fights puts a fighter at risk. Understand, big weight loss before a fight can severely hurt a fighter's ability to take a punch. In history, some of the fighters who have lost their lives in fights lost a lot of weight before the fight. Today, in recent fights, we saw Lawrence Okolie, the champion at cruiserweight, against Chris Billam-Smith, and you noticed Okolie, who is 6'5", who was fighting at 200 pounds, right? When you saw him, he has thin legs, but when you saw him, you wondered, how is this guy able to make weight? Well, he's fighting a puncher, and he was holding on, folks. He had very little punch resistance that night. Hits the canvas multiple times. Is clinging to his opponent. Understand, too, Okolie never seemed to recover from the first punch that put him down. And Okolie has one of boxing's best jabs. Okolie couldn't, after getting hit, after getting hurt, couldn't recover enough to establish the jab, to use his 6'5" frame, and to stay outside of the pocket. Now, let me just say, I have also found that a fighter's reflexes diminish if that fighter is hard on his body and is gaining and losing dozens of pounds between matches. The yo-yoing of weight is particularly troublesome for Devin Haney, since Haney doesn't have a huge punch. Folks, he doesn't have a big punch at 140. Lomachenko at 135 went the distance with Haney in Haney's last fight at 135. Haney's game relies on coordination and lateral movement, as well as quickness. Those are the very things that get hurt when a fighter is gaining and losing dozens of pounds between fights. You may have heard the adage, the legs are the first to go. Right, folks? I'm just telling you, your legs go faster when you don't take care of your body. Now, let's be clear on Devin Haney. And Haney's an unbeaten fighter. I have a lot of respect for Haney, even though I picked against him in his last fight. I have a lot of respect for Haney. But let's be clear here. Weight matters in boxing. At 140, he has a chance to beat the best in the division. He's viable against Catterall, Richardson, Lopez. Right? I'd question whether he's viable against Ramirez. But Haney proved me wrong against Prograis. Let's just say at 140, he's viable. He already has a share of the title. He's viable against the other champions. At 147, the world changes. I don't believe he's viable against Jaron Ennis. Ennis, great athlete. Ennis moves around the ring. Ennis has timing. The things that make Devin Haney great, I believe Ennis has, and Ennis hits harder than Haney. Right? Understand, I'm not even sure if Ennis, 24 hours after a weigh-in, weighs 165 pounds. I'm just telling you the timing, the speed, the power, in my book, would give Ennis the edge. People here also know what I think about Terence Crawford. I believe Crawford is the best fighter in the sport pound for pound. Right? Crawford is that guy who you don't even realize is a closer. I took Crawford over Errol Spence. Quite frankly, in my mind, I thought Crawford would win that fight more than a year before the fight took place. I don't see Devin Haney being competitive against Crawford. Let's just say Crawford would know that he has a chance to stop Devin Haney. Haney couldn't think that he has a chance to stop Terence Crawford. Understand, at 154, you have a guy coming off his career worst performance, Jermell Charlo. But Charlo has legs. He's episodic. He's what I call an ambush fighter. He can move. He can, from long range, jump in the pocket and throw big punches. Brian Castano does not go the distance against Jermell Charlo in the rematch. Understand, fighters with big punches like Jason Rosario found that they could not take Jermell Charlo's sudden body shots. Right? Charlo's out of the pocket. Suddenly he's in the pocket. He's throwing hardcore body shots. Since Charlo can match Devin Haney's movement, and since Charlo is much more sudden than Devin Haney, I don't believe Devin Haney would do well against Jermell Charlo. Let's talk about another guy at 154, Erickson Lubin. Folks, I understand Lubin has lost before to Charlo, to Sebastian, the tall guy, Fundora, right? But understand, in the entire sport of boxing, in my opinion, Erickson Lubin is one of the premier body punchers in the sport. Right? Lubin is going to be on his front foot as he was against Charlo, trying to hunt down a Devin Haney. If Haney is a guy who continues to gain 25 pounds in the less than 24 hours after a weigh-in, those body punches are going to hurt Devin Haney. Right? When you're yo-yoing in weight, folks, I'm just telling you, your body's not ready for the pounding. Let's just say I think that Devin Haney would have a hard time at 154 pounds. Now, gamblers need to keep an eye on the situation. I believe gamblers also need to make a mental note of the fighters who gain a lot of weight and have to lose a lot of weight in training camp. You have a whole other group of fighters who are always in shape, who don't have to worry about doing so. Understand, Dmitry Bivol hasn't knocked out anyone for several years. He's relying on hand speed, on stamina, on movement, just like Devin Haney is. But this is the guy who's always in shape. This is also a guy who is comfortable at 175. He doesn't have the pressure to fight one floor up at the next division, which fortunately for him is 25 pounds up. Right? He's comfortable at 175. Another guy who looks in great shape, big time puncher, is comfortable at his weight, is the king at 160, Janibek Alim Kaluli. Right? I would say that Dmitry Bivol and Janibek are always in shape. They're always ready. Their training camps focus on the opponent. Devin Haney, if he wants to have more longevity in the sport at the very top, than, let's say, an Adrian Broner, who was very promising, who was about billions early in his career. And then, of course, even with great defensive skills, fell off a bit later in his career. If he wants to avoid that, if he wants to stay in his prime, around the top of his division, Devin Haney is going to have to change things. Let me close by saying fighters like, I should say legends, like Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao, Bernard Hopkins, sometimes would come in several pounds below the weight limit for some of their fights. Floyd famously fought Oscar De La Hoya for Oscar's title at 154, and I believe Mayweather weighed in at 152 pounds or less. Right? Understand, these are fighters who didn't gain 25 pounds after a weigh-in. Mayweather had no need to gain any weight after his weigh-in against a big Oscar De La Hoya, because Mayweather was comfortable at the weight. Mayweather understood that he was going to try to win with great defense, with hand speed, with boxing ability, with movement. He didn't need the extra pounds. Mayweather was actually fighting at his actual weight right? Those are the guys, to me, who gamblers need to have a preference for. In your 20s, you can add and drop a lot of weight. I'm just telling you, you start to lose that ability in your late 20s, right? I can look at fighters and I can think to myself, okay, can this guy actually lose the weight and still be effective? I have questions right now on whether Demetrius Andrade can go from 168 to 160 and still be effective. I'm guessing along the way, he's going to have catch weight fights. I want people to think about Jamal with an A, Charlo. He was out of the ring for a long period of time. This is a guy who has a title at 160 pounds. He makes a comeback. It's not like it's an immediate comeback either. He makes a comeback after being out the ring a long period of time. And you mean to tell me that he needed a catch weight for the comeback? You're the champ at 160 pounds and you aren't already around 160 pounds. You actually need a catch weight fight. Understand what that means. That means that the guy, as he's losing weight to make weight, still couldn't make the weight. He needed a cushion. He didn't have the confidence to make the weight. And he was fighting a guy, David Benavidez' brother, who didn't have ample experience at 160 pounds. In other words, Jamal Charlo already had a weight advantage and still needed a catch weight in his comeback fight. If you're a gambler, folks, that's a red flag. The red flags are out here on Devin Haney. He's what I call all dressed up with nowhere to go. Right, folks? Loma goes the distance with you at 135. Let's think about the sequence. Loma goes the distance with you at 135. In your next fight, you win the title at 140. To the public, are you sure here that Devin Haney can defend that title at 140? Can Haney at this stage even make 140 at a weigh-in? As I've said here, 147 and 154 are different worlds. Right? I see where Devin Haney ran into Terence Crawford and some choice words were said. Right? If Haney were to fight Crawford, would that fight even be at 147? Isn't it possible that Haney might be forced to fight at 154? Folks, figure out which waters are shark infested. If you're having problems with weight, you don't want to be in the ring with a master like a Terence Crawford. If you had to lose 25 pounds to make weight at the weigh-in, you don't want to deal with a knockout puncher who hasn't allowed a guy to go to the distance against him for several years. Right? So the Haney situation requires people watching. I have no doubt that there are people around Devin Haney who love him. Right? I know his father is a key part of his team, but understand, love's not the issue here. It's focus. Right? There have been some fighters in history who are out late at night, who traveled a lot. Carlos Monzon, one of the legends at 160 pounds, was a late night guy, right? From what I'm hearing, Ray Leonard, earlier in his career, was a late night guy, right? In the annals of sport, one of my favorite athletes, Babe Ruth, was a late night guy, right? I'm just telling you, boxing requires a little bit more discipline. A guy who used to be a late night guy, a pub guy, Tyson Fury, sparred with Jared Anderson, the young big baby from the United States. And according to reports, Fury was so impressed with Anderson, he told Anderson, look, if you live, my words, not the heavyweight champ's words, if you live a Spartan life, right? If you don't get yourself mixed up with late nights and a lack of focus, right? If you dedicate yourself to the sport of boxing, you're going to be champion. That's what he told Jared Anderson. And understand, Fury himself had an alcohol problem, may have had a drug problem, gained a lot of weight, right? Now Fury's keeping it together. He has a wife, he has a family, he has a number of kids. He also has an ecosystem around him where he's sparring with people like Joseph Parker. He sparred with Joe Joyce, right? He, has an active interest in Hughie Fury's career, right? Just understand, the guys who've lived a little bit in their 20s, they understand that's not the way to do it as they get older in the sport of boxing. These fighters have a choice. You can enjoy your generation and hit the streets and be a celebrity, or you can dedicate yourself to the sport of boxing, sacrifice a little bit in order to have a great career in your 20s and into your mid-30s, right? Devin Haney's going to have to figure that out. He's all dressed up with nowhere to go. I'm curious to see where Devin Haney fights next. Just understand, if he's at 154 and he decides, you know what, I'm not ready for the champ here, I'm not going to deal with Jamel Charlo. If he says to himself, I'm not going to deal with Erickson Lubin, I don't, that's a bit much right now, where does he go? Does he fight Virgil Ortiz, who has a better jab than he does? Right? Granted, Haney's jab's a mobile jab. Ortiz's jab is not a mobile jab. But understand, Ortiz hits awfully hard. What I want is for people to look deeply into Ortiz's background. Right? Ortiz, in my opinion, was starving himself to make weight at lower weight classes. Right? He developed medical conditions. Now he's gained the weight, and I'm looking forward to his next fight. He's fighting at 154. Right? Folks, weight matters. You have to make your weight work for you. I have concerns about that whenever I hear that a fighter has gained 25 pounds in one day after the weigh-in before a big fight. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.